upheaval. But I think 1999, cybersecurity wasn't really on the radar as it is, and we've all seen it transpired over the last 4 weeks, pressed into the last 2 weeks, with this poly crisis where technology is disrupting the three levels as we see today, right? This complex world. We have cybersecurity, but also geopolitical specialists on the panel, and I'm delighted for us to dive in. And you've had this very filled history. You were saying that you a year that you've never seen a pandemic, the way you described it to me on the phone, like we see it today, where you have those forces, right? Economic, political, environmental, and then remote technology revolution carrying on AI. What does that mean for the cybersecurity apps we have today?
Yeah, very good morning. It's wonderful to be back in Rio and inviting everybody from the service with Korea, some level of fun in the discussion. I'm really concerned because the overall we've seen, or let's see, in such in my long, what I've seen 10 or 15 years, the development of terrorism, organized crime, and specifically is a national security almost everywhere around the world, by industrial scale attacks our societies, and perhaps a major problem that technology actually, and as an international community, I think we need to consider how fast we are acting. We are very often talking about that we need to be prepared for the next change, but the reality is, regarding the cyberspace, we all had major incidents 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where 150 countries, thousands of computers were affected, but have we been acting fast enough? And now the next change is coming with artificial intelligence, and the criminals are already there.
Yes.
And legislators, but also services around the world are struggling in keeping unprecedented opportunities for criminals to attack our systems. That is what we have to prevent, that cyberspace is not becoming a kind of no-go area, which we only know from the physical world.
Okay. Before I bring the specialists into this, I think it's interesting from an international standpoint, but also the President of the European Union, European Commission, and Prime Minister of Portugal. I think the other element that we're reluctant to say because of the controversies around that we see today, the tariff regime, discussion today with China and Africa working closely together, while you see the number one and number two is the US and China competing fiercely. So, José Manuel, how does this competition for technological advantage in this? In fact, I was with the Secretary of the Interior in Milan for the US government. He said technology competition between US and China is actually a war. Yeah. So how do you have collaboration to ward off criminals when you have the number one economies asking people to pick sides when you're trying to set up your domestic defenses?
Okay. So thank you very much, John. Thank you also for the invitation. It's a pleasure for my first time in a very important global security forum. So answering directly your question, that's a challenge now. It's becoming very much more difficult, Mr. Stark has said. The level of cooperation is not the same today. Many of these technologies, we will use technologies. There are technologies that are important for science and purposes. I personally believe that AI will change almost everything. I'm not a technologist. I have the privilege to be in contact with some of the most important investors, creators of these great companies in the world. So I've been in touch with them for years now, including someone who left recently, Henry Kissinger, not a technologist, but was studying, came, by the way, to Lisbon some weeks before he died already, more than 100 years, and he died studying the impact of AI in geopolitics. But the issue is precisely technologies change the world for the better in science, in health, in many others. areas, but they are important from a war point of view. And with the rising concerns of national security of the world, including, in this case, if I'm coming from Europe, in Europe, we have a war going on in Europe. Sometimes outside Europe, people did not get the same sense of urgency. The first time such a big war in Europe, we already had wars after the Second World War, but with this impact, Russia, the biggest country in the planet, of its dimension, invading, scale invasion of a very important country as well. So everything now is related to security, including the economy. So the economies are changing because they are preparing for hoping, of course, that the worst is going to happen. And that, of course, makes life more difficult for those who want of sincere cooperation between the different players. Because it will be, of course, nice to have security, as in other matters, to have more international cooperation against criminals, for instance. But the problem is that the competition is also between states. Be honest about it. So I'm no longer in public office. My sincerity is growing day by day. So I'm expressing my opinion in sincerity.
That's the beauty of having people that have left office. They actually can speak their mind, right? And speak the truth.
Yeah, so the point is that, today, honestly, the governments are only protecting their systems against crime, for economic reasons. They are protecting their systems against other governments. It makes, of course, the international cooperation more difficult in this field that I have dual use, including for technologies for war as well.
Thank you very much for the interventions. And to those who have dealt with this on the front line, so Dr. it's great to have you. We have, cyber crime accord UN, which is super important in 25 countries. Fair to say, 30 years of coverage, I've never seen a cooperation at this level. When we have post-World War II architectures that were for collaboration. And your point, Dr. Geiss, is that we need to lean in on multilateralism and not zoom out. How do you do that when some of the rules are being broken on trade, which is a reflection of lack of support for the World Trade Organization? It's just a minor example.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning. And it's my third time here, so great to be back in this cybersecurity forum. We've just heard from all the previous speakers how complex the security
organization. Just one example.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm here. So great to be back for this cybersecurity forum. Absolutely, to lean, I would say. We've heard from all the speakers how complex the security situation is. In brackets, I sometimes think state the complexity and kind of makes the problem huge, almost impossible, but of course the complexity is there that share. So if you deal with problems, you want to use as many in your toolbox. I see nations putting a hammer. For smaller nations, the hammer is too small. Some of them are out clearly. So when you want to some tape and something, multilateralism should be the first tool to think of, maybe even before the hammer. These days, it's very much about the hammer, I find. Then, of course, multilateralism, we maybe need to check our expectations. The UN is 80 years this year, and with the UN and with the multilateral system, we kind of have the expectation it will fix all of our problems. All the problems that even the most powerful nations are not able to fix. And to do this with a budget which is 1/10, of the value of the global market for potato chips. So, expectation management, what can it do? And I think there we need to make a better business case. We certainly need to improve getting away from just hollow slogans, multilateralism is the way to go. We really have to be precise about answering what problem is it actually going to solve for us. Unless we do it, I think we'll see more states dropping out of this kind of multilateral structure. It's not exactly appealing to everyone these days, we have to be honest. This is why there's a big reform process ongoing at the United Nations. And here for cyber, let's stop with this multilateralism, how we fix it. what problem are we actually going to solve? Raise awareness on a universal level for an ever-evolving threat landscape. Be prepared when AI and quantum come around the corner and all the current deterrence models will fall apart. What else will we turn to? Be clear about the economic value of multilateralism. You know, it doesn't always work and deliver the results that we expect, but how much worse, how much more expensive is it going to be if everyone tries it alone? How chaotic is it going to get? And it's not like the world is not chaotic enough as it is. So I do think also the pendulum also kind of goes different ways. And with all the chaos around us, all the transformation in trade that you mentioned, in military domain, in the scientific domain, the thing about cyber, the new technologies, they span all of these domains. And you spoke of war, or cited someone who spoke of war. I would always caution using the word war, but of course...
I 100% agree with you, but that's the level we're at today.
Right, no,
So
certainly.
If somebody's willing to go public and say, I'm a member of this cabinet, and this is a conflict, it's a war against US-China on technology, it's an alarm bell.
But,
you'd agree.
Well, I wouldn't use the term, but I would say the state of affairs is extremely concerning, but it spans all of these different dimensions. And so, you know, you will want to bring everyone in and hear everyone's voices and different perspectives. The UN, the multilateral system, is and remains the only forum where that can really actually happen.
Great. It's fantastic analysis. Robert, it's great to have you again here at the GCF. And this is often talked about in a very amorphous way, the supply chains. And why do supply chains matter? And they were disrupted in COVID-19 in a profound way. And it left some vulnerabilities, if you will. And so we're seeing extraordinary disruption in the last 2 weeks, right? On air traffic control systems, for example. We see this in factories in the UK, which is raising alarm bells. We saw it in a factory in Japan, raising alarm bells. What are the vulnerabilities in those supply chains that we should be aware of, and then supporting the weakest link? Because a lot of these global players have small and medium-sized enterprises supporting them.
So thanks, John, and first of all, good morning, and great to be in Riyadh and great to be at the Global Cybersecurity Forum. You're absolutely right, and there was it's becoming, I think, of a theme of the last day, the supply chains, because if you look back at the major cyber attacks of the last 5 years, you know, over 80% of them are involving the supply chain, either delivered through it or attacking the supply chain. And those chains are global, they're transnational, so they don't stick to a country. The same supplier of software for baggage handling at Heathrow is also supplying it in airports around the world. So we all suffer when the supply chain goes down. And I think it's changing the way that governments and regulators think about it. The EU has already regulated to say that companies, all of us, should be liable for, responsible for the security of our supplier companies, many of which are very small. They don't have the capability, the resources to do security like the big enterprises. So we really need to help our vendors, our suppliers, get better and improve their cybersecurity standards. And that is possible. It's not an impossible task at all. It's about treating our ecosystem of suppliers like we used to treat our own networks. So it's no longer enough to say, well, I've protected my company really well, or my government. I now need to worry about this tens of thousands of vendors and suppliers. How do I make them as good or good enough to stop these ransomware attacks, for example, coming through? And I think that is the big challenge. It's the challenge that regulators from the EU through to Singapore are already onto. They're beginning to legislate on. We're about to in the UK. As you say, we've had some pretty serious attacks delivered through the supply chain, Jaguar Land Rover and others. So I think that's the big challenge for the next few years in cybersecurity is not just to concentrate on ourselves, but on all those who supply us and feed into us.
Can I have a quick follow-up with you? I learned a lot during the session we had with Aramco yesterday with Ahmed Al-Kuwaiter about the major cyber attack in 2012 in the kingdom. It was a major wake-up call. The king and the crown prince, they said, we need to fortify our system. So now NCA, the Cybersecurity Authority, works with all the critical infrastructure companies and the banks 24/7, and if one has an incursion, they know and share that information quickly. Can this be a model? I know some of the other countries around the world are doing it, but can this be a model where we say, this we know works, and so that's where collaboration should happen? Am I being too ambitious, do you think?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think your conversation yesterday was fascinating with Ahmed Al-Qaeda, and I think Saudi Aramco have done some amazing things on supply chain. They've kind of led the way because they had that incident, and I think it was a real wake-up call, as you've said. And now they're doing things which I think the rest of the world wants to imitate. And I think you're right, that level of ambition of trying to monitor at scale across a nation and then multinationally attacks on the supply chain is absolutely possible and is already happening in some countries.
Good. Jürgen, I'd love to have you come in and please pick up on what Robert was saying. But the other point you made is that what are examples that you had from your police work on a regional and international level where you had collaboration? Five Eyes is one of those, right? And you can explain the concept of Five Eyes. But how do you bring that into the cyberspace in a more profound way? Thanks.
I mean, the cyber criminals, but the same applies for the most dangerous organized crime groups in the world. And perhaps there's not that much difference any longer in the future, but they are operating across the globe. And across the globe means across the globe. So even a group of like-minded states, or even a particular region, and for instance, Europe is very advanced in terms of police cooperation and security cooperation, at the end of the day is not enough. And that is why my former organization, Interpol, is so important, the UN is so important, bringing, in regards to Interpol, 196 member countries to the table. And one of the key questions in light of the problem that, let's say, what we are discussing here in the context of conflict, of disruption for the criminals, these are opportunities. And we should not underestimate that they carefully monitor the global situation, conflict between countries, weak spots in terms of international cooperation, because this is where they act, where they are looking for opportunities to attack our critical infrastructures or our private systems. And the second element is time is our enemy in this regard, because the criminals, they can already apply artificial intelligence. They can already start testing, whereas we in law enforcement are still discussing, do we have the legal basis to use big data analysis, certain tools, and that takes time, and it takes too much time. Second point, what was already said, I think one of the critical issues that we have not been fixing yet, despite the fact that major attacks happened already 10 years ago, it's not new, wake-up calls already happened, is how do we build, in light of a global problem, an architecture of security at national, regional, and global level that would address the problem. And to making it specific, and I also like to be specific, how do we ensure that information is flowing instantly? Information that currently sits on different islands, law enforcement, private sector, one country, another country, but these islands of information are not connected yet, or let's say not properly connected yet. And this is the reason why we are not yet having a global early warning system, because what today might pop up in Europe will be in this region tomorrow, and vice versa. So how do we make sure that this information flows, that the legal framework exists, so that there are no risks for private sector to share with law enforcement share with private sector? How do we do that on a national level across sectors? Not just, let's say, one industry, car industry in Germany with energy, but across sectors, sharing that we are in a position to understand the threats and that we are in a good position to protect our systems. Last remark, in my home country, Germany, only 10% of all the cyber incidents are being reported to the public authorities, including police. 90%, no idea what is going to happen. And that needs to change. And I think it's not just in Germany, that's an observation all around the world, that we still do not have a complete overview what exactly is going on. Of course, there are the shock events, like now what we have been discussing regarding the airports, but we have to do more, and we only can do that as a global community. So regional, national is important, but it's not enough.
Well, you raised an interesting point. So within this region, you have the GCC, or you have ASEAN. I don't even think they're at the level of sharing that sort of information, probably on security, but it doesn't probably include cybersecurity, which raises an interesting point for José Manuel about Russia-Ukraine. What can we learn from this? Because they've been on the defense, and cyber's part of it. So they always say the best defense is a good offense, right? What lessons can we take away from Russia, Ukraine, and where can the European Union benefit from a deeper collaboration there?
Yeah, I mean, yes, everybody's studying the war of Russia against Ukraine, also lessons to learn from not only for war, but for overall concept of security. In fact, just yesterday, there was a European Council meeting in Copenhagen, and the conclusions were to reinforce the scoping of the vulnerability system all over Europe. And basically, it's learning with the experience of the war in Ukraine, and also the attacks that are already going on against Europe. You mentioned, John used the word war in terms of cybersecurity. I don't think it is an exaggeration. The Prime Minister of Denmark, Mrs. Frederiksen, she said herself, we are already in a hybrid war. So in Europe, we are now in a hybrid war. Cybersecurity threats are just a part of that hybrid war. There are disinformation, sabotage, going against those submarine cables. We are already in a hybrid war. We are not exaggerating that. And that's why now in Europe we are preparing for the worst possibilities. Not only the European Union as such, but NATO, in good cooperation with NATO. And that's an important element. So today I think I can say without exaggeration that at European level, there is a determination not to continue to be what I've been calling a geopolitical teenager. The European Union has been a geopolitical teenager, not somehow reluctant to the issues of hard power. Hard power was for the Americans, for the Russians, for the Chinese, but now the Europeans have learned, after the wake-up call of the invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and also, to be honest, after the United States pressure for the Europeans to do more for their own defense, and there was a very important decisions in NATO summit in June this year, with commitment of 3% of GDP of all NATO members, 3% of GDP for defense, and 3.5, I'm sorry, and 5% overall security, I mean defense-related matters, that was where cybersecurity comes. There will be huge investment in Europe. So Europe is changing dramatically. By the way, Germany is the most important change. For those who know a little bit about Germany, it's a major change, a country that after the Second War, for obvious reasons, was so committed to pacifism. Now, Germany changed the constitution, changed the so-called debt brake, so that can be theoretically no limits in terms of investment in defense. And when Germany changes, that has a huge impact in Europe. So yes, now we are learning with the experience of Ukraine and also the technical experience of Ukraine. Because I'm not a military expert, but I'm told by the experts that what the Ukrainians are doing in terms of electronic warfare, electronic defense is simply amazing. It's in terms of, when there is a war, of course, people are much more acute.
Sure.
They adapt much more. The sense of urgency is much stronger. It's existential, it's a vital issue. And in fact, apparently, the Ukrainians, also with support of some Western allies in terms of intelligence, they have been remarkable in defending their territory, thanks also to electronic systems of protection. So now we are in Europe, in the European Union, we are learning with, let's say, concrete experience of the Ukrainians in the battlefield.
Okay. Robert, I'd love to get your thoughts on this because the UK has been doing a lot of intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians in support because of its intelligence expertise. No accident then that we see the cyber incidents escalating in the UK. So how do we move at more rapid pace here for the deeper collaboration? And Dr. Geiss, I'd love to have you jump in on this as well. Does it take a sledgehammer over your head to say, oh, we need to move faster? We can't be politically correct with our data when it comes to security, as Jürgen was talking about. I'd love to have the two of you jump in with that expertise that you have.
I think it's a great point that there's so much to learn from the way Ukraine has defended itself in partnership with the private sector, with big tech and smaller companies and other countries. And the thing that stands out to me, as well as data sharing, is their ability to build resilience. So they've been incredibly resilient. They've known how to use cloud wisely, so to have a lot of their data stored outside the country, which of course is difficult for many of our countries, but is really important. That has saved them in many ways. But they've also learnt how to restore systems, how to back up, how to get back up and running and keep the citizens online. I think it's a very powerful example of the pressure of wartime, I suppose, to allow people to relax their worries and start working together. And I think we could learn from that, absolutely.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Dr. Geiss.
Yeah, I mean, I think militaries all over the world are studying this war in Ukraine. And the one takeaway for purposes of what we do in my office at the UN is that machine warfare is coming. And it's coming a lot faster than probably most of us would have anticipated just some years ago. And if we kind of see where the investments are going today, there's a huge push that is revolutionary, I would say, of how autonomous the systems are becoming. It's not just a cyber issue, it's a convergence of many new technologies from outer space, AI, of course, and cyber. They all are coming into the mix and the picture. So that's the big takeaway for us. And then, of course, the follow-up, how do we prevent escalation in the future? How do we protect civilians from these kind of systems? Those are the questions that we would focus on in that regard.
Okay, I don't want to sound, too soft on this, but can we have a coalition of the willing when you have the U.S. and China asking people to pick sides? I mean, we're almost too PC in Europe. I live in London, and there was this. I always got worried when they were saying we haven't had conflict on European soil for 70 years, and I actually went up to one of the speakers and said, I don't think you should be saying that too much. And sure enough, we got, we had a conflict with Russia, Ukraine, really close to the heart of Europe. Can you have a coalition of those who support multilateralism, at least on common ground when it comes to cyber? Jürgen, is it possible?
I mean, is there any other way? That's the question.
But is there a willingness to push that, to say we want to defend what we built over the last 80 years?
I mean, it's maybe not the right question to somebody who's representing police. Again, we stand for a global coalition of the willing, of course, addressing something that is indeed a global problem. And we are deeply lobbying for, again, this integrated exchange of information, which is crucial. And just to make it tangible, just one example from Singapore, where Interpol is having a global complex for innovation. In Singapore, 70%, I think, of all crimes occurring is already cyber-related. What Singapore has been doing, putting under one roof, 24/7, law enforcement, regulators, lawmakers, telecommunication providers, banks, and so on, to meet the dynamics of the cyber environment regarding online scams and other things who are coming on top of what we have been discussing so far. And I think that describes the direction. We cannot do it alone. No company can do it alone, no country can do it alone, no region can do it alone. We need platforms. And I can only commend also Saudi Arabia, for instance, for this initiative on capacity building, because that's a big problem. Not only that small companies are lacking capacity, law enforcement, maybe 2/3 of Interpol member countries' police services have only little or no capabilities to address the threat. Just one example. So it requires teamwork, simply speaking, and putting those together and having a platform like here in Riyadh, where those who are committed come together and build these strong alliances and work, of course, also against the fragmentation of the response. We need to come together.
Interesting. José Manuel, what are your thoughts about this to accelerate that level of collaboration here? We've seen what's been built in Saudi Arabia in the last 4 years together, right? This community is solid. And, Robert, I'd love to have you jump in as well, but how do you accelerate defense of multilateralism, but to say in the cyberspace, it should be really mission critical to do this, even in an ASEAN structure, right? Or even in the EU structure, even the GCC structure.
Exactly, John, you are mentioning it. At regional level, this is already happening. In Europe, we are doing a lot in these fields. That before, it was simply not possible. It was even not thinkable. Now, but in European Union, because the countries are ready to share data. I believe the other successful regional integration like ASEAN that you've mentioned, the Gulf Cooperation Council, are certainly looking at it. I personally have some doubts. I wish we could do more at global level. So I'm a multilateralist myself. But I have to be honest, intellectually honest, today, the United Nations, it's not the fault of the United Nations. The United Nations can only deliver what the member states, the nations, let it deliver. But we know that Security Council is blocked. We know very well that some of the major powers, they block the decisions there. That's the reality. So that's why a worldwide global cooperation seems to me difficult. It does not mean that we should not try. We are now working on a new convention on cybersecurity. It's going to be, I think, this month in Vietnam, so it's going to be work. We have a convention already on the, it was the Budapest Convention on Cybersecurity, in fact, that was a European initiative, Council of Europe initiative, but China, Russia, India, many other very relevant partners, they have never signed it, and even less ratified it, with the arguments of sovereignty, because these matters are linked to data. And today, data is a very precious, let's say, resource, at least from a geopolitical point of view. That's why I believe some coalitions of the willing are possible. But I have to be honest, I don't think we are going to have a great success in terms of binding treaties, binding rules at global level. That does not mean that we should not try. And also there are initiatives like this one. So we are here, and many on the room and outside the room, we have many of the best experts in the world on cybersecurity meeting here in Riyadh already for some years. So that's a hub, that's an important, and Saudi can play a role there. It's already playing a role because Saudi Arabia can speak with the United States, with China, with other very relevant partners. So it's a space of dialogue, and dialogue is better than the alternative. So yes, I think something is possible, but we should be realistic about what we can achieve.
Good. Robert, why don't you go ahead, and then Robin, you'll wrap us up. Please, just jump in.
I mean, I agree, and but to give an example of where it's working, because I know there's a lot of gloom at the moment on multilateralism, but if you look at the way countries and regions have been cooperating on raising standards for secure software, because ultimately the reason why we're all here and why GCF is so busy is we've built this digital infrastructure of our economies on insecure software and hardware for 20 years. And we haven't had the economic incentives to make that better. So you see from Singapore through the Middle East to the US and the EU, of course, there are new standards to do security by design, build that in, incentivize it, regulate it. That will take years to feed through, but it's going to make a fundamental difference and raise the standards of security for all of us. And I think that's a success story. It's not very political. Everybody's got an interest in it, but it's an area where multilateralism has quietly worked at a technical level.
Interesting. Go ahead, Dr. Rahman.
Yeah, no, I mean, I very much agree with that. Multilateralism at the technical level, and that's really the Geneva kind of bubble where I'm from. There you see it working. It just doesn't make headlines every day.
That's the good news.
Yeah, that's the good news. And I mean, the bad news is, I mean, it does seem that cooperation internationally has really deteriorated to perhaps even unprecedented levels in a long time. And, you know, do we want to continue on this path? And simultaneously, multilateralism is as weak as it possibly has been in a very long time. So the two go hand in hand. And, I mean, right now, so many countries trying to go it alone. Do we have the sense that the world is more stable and secure? There seems to be an unprecedented, surprising event every other week. So, you know, before long, I think there will be a longing to get out of this chaotic kind of international relations that we're currently seeing. That's one. The other is the first point I made on this panel, a better value proposition for multilateralism. You know, no one is lifted out of their chairs to fight for multilateralism, such a complicated term. People fight for peace, equality, justice, and of course multilateralism is the way to get us there, but I think we could be much better in our messaging and making that message clear. And with that, I think the appeal, the marketing, the make multilateralism great again slogan, that's kind of missing to get it into people's heads what it actually delivers.
Yeah, I think I think we should also recognize why we had 75 years of peace, right? Part of it, and why do we had 25 years of low inflation and solid growth is because of those accords. This is something that should be said more often and not hidden. It's like, how did we get here, as opposed to where are we today. Jürgen, go ahead, quickly.
Yeah, no, it seems that cybersecurity leadership is required across the globe. And leadership means building strong alliances against the alliances that already exist at the level of criminals and those who want to abuse technology.
Yeah, and I don't think it's wrong to give awareness. As you said, 10% are reported in Germany. People should know what's going on and then embrace the idea it's a challenge, but it's for the public good, as we said. And security at the start should be part of that equation. What a fantastic panel. We want to, I think, collectively for the panel, thank the governor and the deputy governor of the National Cybersecurity Authority and the GCF for bringing together both an opening plenary and the second day plenary that's been so rich. And it's a real honor to have you all together here. Can we give a nice round of applause to our panelists? Thank you very, very much. Thanks.